Islam is absolutely the bigger threat. Absolutely the bigger threat.
The state is very quick to shout about Islamophobia.
Yes.
In this instance, it's very quick to talk about anti-Semitism.
Yes.
The people that they leave out every single time is Christianity.
This anti-Semitic obsession with Israel, and you're getting carried away with that narrative.
So what is it that makes you say that it's not a genocide?
You are allowing alt-right racists to distort your worldview.
I think there's a lot of things we have to consider when we think about Israel.
Brother, I want to caution you. You are leaning heavily into an anti-Semitic trope.
Before we begin, as a special favor to me, could I ask that you subscribe to the channel? It costs you nothing but means the world to us. Recently, YouTube was nice enough to delete our old account. But fortunately, that hasn't stopped us. In fact, we're more determined than ever, and that's why we need your support. Anyways, enough from me. I hope you enjoy. Bob, very happy to have the chance to talk. How you been?
I've been well, thank you. It's good to be back. Maybe this is the beginning of a burgeoning cooperative between us.
There you go. Well, yeah, I think I'm trying to recall. I think last time we spoke a lot about multiculturalism, and in general in the country, I feel a lot has happened since then.
Yeah.
Things like the Tommy Robinson March. Mostly protesting, the mass immigration. We had the Brit card, which the government put in place, and they were saying that, the whole sale was, it's there to tackle immigration again. Obviously,
they're wanting to introduce it. They haven't introduced the Brit card yet.
Wanting to, but obviously with Starmer saying that this will go in, no exceptions. But again, we'll see how it plays out. But one of the selling point he used was we're doing this to tackle immigration. Again, we all know it's a lie, but still.
Yeah.
And then even more recent, we had the attack on the synagogue in Manchester. So to start off, I think obviously with the march, I mean, for me, this was like the best news I heard in a while. And it showed me that one, people are coming together. People are actually being proud of our culture again. And more importantly, it showed that we are united. Now that, like I say, now that we are a little bit more united, protesting against the mass immigration, and by extension, you could say multiculturalism in general, how do you feel about the state of the UK? And would you say we're moving in the right direction?
Well, I think I'd have to offer a correction. The last Unite the Kingdom march, as I recall, was about protesting primarily for free speech. Because that is seriously under threat in the UK, and that was the primary concern of the march. Uncontrolled immigration definitely featured as a subject, but also there were many other subjects that were touched upon, like the Muslim rape gangs, or like the need to rediscover our own Christian heritage. So there was a number of different themes that appeared on the Unite the Kingdom march, and it would be sloppy, Lewis, to describe it as just as an anti-immigration march, because it really wasn't. That was definitely one of the themes, but it was against illegal immigration, not against legal immigration.
You are right. Just to throw it back in then, that is a section of it. And I don't believe that all the people that went to those marches were there for the sake of mass immigration. Like you say, I'd say the bulk of people are just fed up with the government. I'd say mass immigration is a part of it. The free speech, like you say, this overreach of the government, which seems to just be looming everywhere in society right now. There were many aspects, but yeah, for the sake of the conversation, I should have specified. For the sake of conversation, I did want to focus on the multiculturalism aspect.
Yeah, and so, like, again, the one of the central themes of the march was a rediscovery of rediscovery of our Christian identity. The thing is, if we're going to really rediscover our Christian identity, then we have to discover its Catholicity. And the Catholicity of the church means that it is open to all nations, and it belongs to all nations, and all nations can possess it. and all tribes are brought into a confederacy within the people of God, as part of what that means. And so, you originally framed the question as, is the country moving in the right direction? And the answer to that is most definitely not. The march is not representative of the direction of the country. The march is a reaction against the direction of the country, because the direction that we are being steered in by the permanent secretaries, by the activist judges, by the activist journalists, by the ideological police, by the Labour Party, and particularly the alt-left within the Labour Party, is a increasing clamp down upon the freedoms of the individual, which is only going to be made worse if they do manage to pass the ID card, the British card, or however they call it. Like an inability, an unwillingness to secure the southern border, a swamping of the state infrastructure and state institutions, a continued erosion of, an increasingly rapid move away from what's left of our Christian heritage, which isn't very much at all, and the failure and the continued annihilation of our own population through abortion, contraception, and divorce, which can't be separated from things like mass immigration and is a completely self-inflicted wound. Nobody forces us to kill our own kids. We're doing it ourselves. And so, the country, and the situation in the country is going from bad to worse. We're now at a point where GDP and national debt are equivalent. That's a really, really bad economic situation to be in. Basically, at any moment, if our debtors call in the debts, the economy crashes, and it crashes hard. And that could be the catalyst that would then put the spark to the tinder. The tinder of the fact that we now have all the ingredients of a civil war stored up in the country. The country institutionally is just bound up with international treaty after international treaty, meaning that it can no longer operate in its own interest. And many of its top elites have been completely internationalized in their worldview, and they treat the United Kingdom more like a resource to be shared with the world, rather than a national identity run through spreadsheets and calculations. And they don't have any sense of a national identity. There is no national character. And so the United Kingdom march that Tommy organised is a protest against that. It's a symptomatic of how badly things are going, that so many people came out. And I'll just give you an anecdote to point that out. I've got an uncle and a cousin. They've been like a lot of working class people. They grumble at their TVs. They snort when they watch the news, but they don't really do anything. They just shrug their shoulders and sit at home grumbling. But for the first time, they actually came down for this march. So this means that the issues are now motivating people who have not been motivated before. And there is an awakening of a working class patriotic conscience in the country that is separate from socialism, that is separate from socialist ideologues. It's a reawakening of a conscience. It's what I would call the old working class before communism got its teeth into it, which is patriotic, has a sense of its own national identity, but it is basically trying to pick up fragmented pieces of a once beautiful stained glass window and trying to piece those pieces back together without a picture to work from. And, I think that is where this patriotic movement is. It's trying to piece back together a national identity when all it's got are the fragments, but it doesn't know what the picture looked like. So yeah, it's not that the country's moving in the right direction. It's symptomatic of how bad the country's moving in the wrong direction.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And you mentioned about this potential civil war. I I can kind of see I can see it going that way. And like you say, the people who generally just got on with their day to day life, they weren't particularly happy with the state of the country, but it wasn't so big of an annoyance that they're actually going to physically do something about it. The fact that these people are now getting involved, you're right. It's a clear sign how bad things are. And I mean, one of the things which I do find interesting is when we think about civil war, and if I think about the groups who would be involved, I'd say if I think about your everyday person, I'd say most people would probably align with the right. But when I think about maybe the more liberal side of the population, when I think of maybe the younger people, and then with religions, you have your Christians, and then maybe the Muslim. One of the weirdest, unitings of people, the communists, the far left, and Islam. I don't understand for a second why these two are together, but like when it comes to Islam, they're more than happy to partner with these people. But you and I both know that if Islam was ever in power, the lesbians, the gay community, the trans communities, these would be the first people to go. And it baffles me how they don't see that.
So, I mean, you've mentioned the possibility of a civil war. I do see it as one possible horizon that could emerge. But I don't see it as guaranteed. I don't see it as a certifiable fact. And I think another possibility is that the will to any kind of resistance just collapses and that everybody just accepts their fate. And we end up with a liberalized, Islamified society, or sections of society being completely Islamified. That's one possibility. I also see the possibility of a Christian revival, and that Christian revival being connected to the idea of a new Christendom. And I think there's also a possibility in which all of these things happen together, so that there's almost civil war like conditions in some parts of the country, that there's a balkanization of the country where there's civil war like conditions in some parts, Islamification in others, revival of Christianity in others. There's lots of different ways that these current conditions could cash out in a solution or in a conclusion, and it isn't necessarily a civil war. But taking the question of a civil war, if it was to go down that road, and I'm not saying that it will, I think the only thing that would help the patriotic movement is its numbers, but it would need to activate its numbers. But the problem is that so many people from working class backgrounds are so conditioned not to want to think about politics that they just don't want to face up to it. There's a lot of people in this country that don't want to face up to the problems that this country has. And the more we bury our head in the sand, the worse those problems become. If you look at the demographics of the country, Mohammed has been the most popular name in England and Wales now for quite a few years, if you count up all the variant spellings of Mohammed and you add them all together, because one of the reasons why it hasn't always been number one is just because there are different spellings of Mohammed, and when they do the checks, they base it on how the name's spelled. But the result of that, and I think I saw something recently in the last couple of weeks, that the increase to the population that has come through natural birth of the existent population is something like 16%. Like, it's a very low number considering how much the population is grown. In other words, the number, the stat that I've given is probably wrong, but people can Google the stat and find it. But the increase in the population over the last couple of years has been driven by immigration, which means that people who have come into the country have brought with them values and attitudes that are not integrated into the historical matrix of the values and attitudes that have developed here over time, over millennia. The vast majority of the youth in this country, or a significant share of the youth, not majority, but a significant share of the youth in this country, are Muslim. And that means that we only have a few generations to turn the situation around. There is a clock to this. There is a real clock to this, and that clock is ticking. Now, it's still quite possible for us to turn this situation around. It is still more than possible for us to turn this situation around, but we need the right kind of government, and we don't have one. If it did break into a civil war, you would end up with liberal elites siding with Islamists on one side, and depending on how the other side is formed, whether ethno-nationalists are leading the charge or whether Christians are leading the charge, other minorities will side with either one side or the other. So, for instance, Hindus have got their own beef with Islam. Sikhs have got their own beef with Islam. Jews have got their own beef with Islam. But if the people that end up leading the reaction against the alt-left Islamist alliance are ethno-nationalists, then all these other groups are going to think that they're better off siding with alt-left Islamist alliance rather than siding with a bunch of racists. And I wouldn't blame them, you know. And so it's really super important for the church to find its feet in this, because the church, by the nature of its Catholicity, is not in bed with racists and would fight racists. It can unite people from different ethnicities. And its teaching is such that Sikhs, Hindus and Jews would also feel that they could ally themselves with a movement led by the church. Now, this is assuming the civil war scenario. I'm not suggesting that a civil war scenario is inevitable or to be desired. The alt-left and Islam are united by a common hatred. That's their ideologies that are driven by hatred. And so the fact that they will end up hating one another is irrelevant to them, because they hate, you know, the Judeo-Christian heritage more. They hate the West more. And so the Islamists and the alt-left are allied by their hatred of the West. And that will make them unite, just like they did in Iran. And it doesn't matter how many times people like me and you go, but look at what happened in Iran, where there was a revolution primarily driven by the left with a small Islamist contingent. The Islamists captured the revolution, and their very first victims were the alt-left, the communists, who were slaughtered in their tens of thousands. And the alt-left are a really poor student of history. They don't study history. But my primary concern, is not about Britain. It's not about the West. My primary concern is the church, is the Christian community, you know, which is largely in this country. A good section of it is from ethnic minorities, you know, and what I want to do is, and what I'm concerned about, is for the church to find its place in this debacle, and to find its feet and its footing in this debacle in such a way, and to pursue such an agenda that whatever happens, the church survives, or the church comes out stronger than it was before. and that's my primary concern. Saving the United Kingdom is a secondary or tertiary goal for me.
Sure. Oh, so many ways to take this conversation. Let me see. Yeah, I mean, for me, this is just another sign that multiculturalism doesn't work. Like you say, whatever people you import, whatever culture they have, whatever religion they have, you're bringing with them their baggage. You're bringing with them the resentment of the other group, whether, like you say, it's the Jewish and Islamic groups, whether it's the Jewish and Islamic hate, whether it's the Indian and Pakistani beef. And, you're right. You can't really displace these people. They are part of the culture in the UK. So obviously it'd be impossible anyway. But I'm not saying even if you were to take these communities out, the UK would be perfect. Of course, we are far from that. But what I'm saying is one of the main arguments I think against multiculturalism is when you import these people, you're adding more fuel to the fire, you're adding more tension, more hate to our society as a whole. In the long term, it was just teeing up. I was just going to say, in the long term of things, what do you think would be the best solution? Because we have all of these different communities in the UK. The British Pakistani, the British Jewish community. We have all of these different things. What do you think is the long-term solution for this?
So I want to encourage you not to associate my position with your positions. And I also want to encourage you not to put words into my mouth, because you did both in the way you teed up your question.
Apologies.
Yeah, it's all right. But I just want to make people clear that you're creating an association that I don't agree with, and that you're saying you're right as if I've said something, and then what you say is not what I've said. So I just want to be clear about that. Like in terms of multiculturalism, we do agree that liberal multiculturalism has not and does not work. But you've got to understand the reason why it has not and does not work. It has not and does not work because what it does is it says that there is no national character to integrate into, and that what you should do is you should live according to your own values and to your own doctrines, in such a way that that ultimately creates separate, competing and frictional communities, which is what we saw in Leicester when you had mobs of Muslims trying to imitate the Hindu community. It's what we saw when you had gangs of Muslims going into Golders Green to try and intimidate the Jewish community. But I do want to point out to everybody, you haven't seen gangs of Jews going around trying to intimidate Hindus. You haven't seen, we haven't seen, for instance, Hindus and Sikhs fighting on the street. So the friction is more pronounced from within the Muslim community. And that is because the narrative within Islam is one of domination, in which, historically speaking, the Muslims have a historical memory of where they have dominated all these other communities, including Christians. The answer to that is not to say to people, you can't have your own identity. The answer to that is to say that we need a common set of beliefs and values that we all agree upon to be part of this society. The problem with liberalism is it doesn't offer any common values or common beliefs to integrate. It offers these insipid British values that are now being taught in schools, probably quite badly. This idea of civil liberties and individualism and democracy, and I forget what the five are. But they're really quite limp-wristed. They lack depth, they lack substance, and the reason for that is because they have a very poor worked-out metaphysics. Laws need morality. morality needs metaphysics. If your metaphysics are weak, your morality is weak. If your morality is weak, your laws are weak. What we need to offer is not what we need to do is create a strong character of a nation, of which the condition then to come here is that you will integrate. And so integration is the solution to follow. There needs to be a dual path now in the UK of a obligatory integration, which should, I would argue, be framed within Judeo-Christian values, which obviously necessitates a commitment to Judeo-Christian beliefs, because you can't have values without beliefs. And that Judeo-Christian worldview needs to be the matrix in which we operate. And any community can live here, but they have to fit in with that Judeo-Christian matrix. Now, what that would mean is that there are limitations on expressions of culture that would be contradictory to the Judeo-Christian matrix. But the thing that I would point out is that Christianity is an incarnational religion. It believes in incarnation as a central doctrine, which means it also believes in incarnation as a central missiological practice. In other words, when Christians go away and do missionary work, we try to separate what is European culture from what is Christianity. And we try to allow Christianity to be expressed within the culture that we go to, rather than say, you must adopt our culture. Which means that we can create a space within a Christian paradigm in which Hindus, Muslims, Jews, and Sikhs can all still be Hindus, Muslims, Jews, and Sikhs. By allowing those aspects of their own culture that, if they were Christian, would survive anyway. You know, even if they're not Christian. And that is a Catholic multiculturalism. And that's what we need to build in our civilization. A Catholic multiculturalism to replace a liberal multiculturalism.
Okay, so is that in terms of... So I should have explained too what I meant. I meant the culture being... some people refer to culture as the ethnicity. My definition would have been...
culture is not ethnicity.
No, I'm saying some people refer to it that way. But what I'm saying is, I would say the values would be, and the doctrines that you have really play a huge part in terms of your culture.
That's what
our
you just
culture,
said.
Yeah, and I'm saying I agree. And I would say our culture is, of course, Christian, right? But you're saying that give these different communities the Christian values, would that not contradict their religion in some way? Therefore,
yeah, it would. Integrate? So what I was talking about was multiculturalism. So I was talking about cultural expressions. And so the way to navigate multiculturalism from a Catholic doctrine is that you would imagine, let's imagine what Hindu culture would look like if all Hindus had become Christian. Let's look at what the Sikh culture would look like if all Sikhs became Christian. What would Jewish culture look like if all Jews became Christian? And we have an example of this with Messianic Jews. You know, they are very Jewish in their cultural practices, but they're also Christian, and that shows to us that there can be Christian expressions of these cultures. And so a Christian multiculturalism would look at what would be a Sikh background culture for Christians who have come from the Sikh religion, and then say, okay, Sikhs can practice their culture in this way in the United Kingdom, even though they're not Christian. Because if they were Christian, this is what it would look like for those Asians to be Christian. And so it is a Catholic multiculturalism as opposed to a liberal multiculturalism. It assumes their conversion, even though they've not converted. It imagines what of their current culture would survive such a conversion, which is actually quite a lot, to be honest. And then it says you can express your culture in these ways. So let me give an example of something that wouldn't survive. Halal and kosher meat wouldn't survive. Because Christians don't believe in such practices. But choosing not to eat pork would survive, because that's just a dietary choice. That's just a cultural choice. So, Muslims would not be forced to eat pork. Jews would not be forced to eat pork, but they wouldn't be able to practice halal and kosher slaughter. And so this is a Catholic multiculturalism rather than a liberal multiculturalism. And what it does is it takes Christianity as the normative framing of what is allowed to be expressed socially, culturally, and economically. You see, the thing is, if we criticize liberal multiculturalism, we've got to offer an alternative. So what is the alternative? And if all you do is say, I'm against this, I'm against this, I'm against this, well, you're not offering an alternative. So where are we going to look for an alternative? We have to look deep into our own Christian heritage and work out and tease out an alternative Christian civilization from where we are. And I do just want to challenge something else that you said. It was too carte blanche to say importing hate. There's lots of people that come to this country that come with a great sense of gratitude. And so it isn't the case that every immigrant is bringing a heart full of hate with them. There are some, absolutely. Radicalized Islamist societies are not coming with hearts full of love. But there are plenty of Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, and Christians from other parts of the world, and Jains and Zoroastrians from other parts of the world, and atheists from other parts of the world that are coming to this country with hearts full of love.
Yeah. I feel I maybe haven't represented myself well. I completely agree in terms of not every person who arrives in the UK is a bad person. Of course, and I think this is something which I don't say it because I assume everyone knows this. But you're right. Maybe we do need to clarify these things.
Well, I think especially Lewis, sorry to jump in. I think it's especially important for us to use nuance and discretion in our language, especially because we're trying to critique the liberal mainframe. And when we do that in a clumsy way, we allow ourselves to be castigated and to be cornered and to be lampooned as holding positions that we don't hold in our heart. So we have to be careful with our language.
Yeah. You're not wrong. And I appreciate you correcting it because, again, I'm going off the assumption that this is where the bulk of people sit. But you're right. Not everyone sits that way. And sometimes we do need a little bit of nuance. We do need to clarify these things. But yeah, specifically, I guess I am talking about the people who do have contempt for the West. There are people who arrive here who do have hatred in their heart. And it's this group of people I'm talking about. But yeah, like if we take the amount of people who are in the NHS, huge amount of this is imported from, wherever in the world. Our country really couldn't survive without the bulk with a huge amount of immigrants, that's for sure. So yeah, I should make that clear. Something that you said actually then, you were saying how it was the Islamic community which had beef with the Hindus, which had beef with the Jews. And whilst that's correct, is that not just always... there's a lot about Islamic culture which I don't agree with. I can definitely see where you're going with it, but it would also be fair to say that other communities are a contributor towards this hate too, right? I mean, obviously, big news with what's going on in Israel and Gaza, which has been going on for years now. But to blame everything on Islam, I think maybe that's a step too far. How would you see that?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not blaming everything on Islam, and I'm not blaming every conflict on Islam. So, for instance, there are, but what I am saying is that the hatred and contempt that is taught in the Qur'an, in the Hadiths, and in the tafsirs, and also within the book, the manuals of fiqh, within Islam, largely contributes to a contemptuous and superioristic attitude of too big a section of the Muslim community. And those two things can't be separated. Now, I understand that libtards, they can't join up the dots,
Sure.
like they're so blindsided by their ideology of individualism that they cannot spot a pattern, even when the pattern is literally punching them in the face. But I'm not a liberal, and so I'm not blinded by individualism, and so I can see patterns of behavior within groups of people. And let me pick on white patriots to just highlight this. The white working class patriotic community has profound problems in addiction, in substance abuse, and in family breakdown. And that is and also massive amounts of abortion. And this is because of the failed values of white working class British people. I can say that because I'm not frightened to spot patterns. I'm not saying it's true of every white working class person. Same as I'm not saying that every Muslim is an Islamist. But what I can spot is a pattern of oppression and superiority. And I can identify where that comes from because I'm able to read the Quran, the Hadiths, the Tafsir, and the manuals of fiqh. And so I'm able to see that that is rooted in an Islamic milieu. Just like I can see that it is the erosion of values that has led to the degeneracy that has taken grip within white working class patriot communities.
Yeah.
And unless as a society, and this is why freedom of speech and political discourse is so important, unless as a society we are able to call a spade, then we cannot democratically find a way forward to solutions. All ideas, all hypotheses, all theories should be tested in public debate. And in rigorous public debate, the best ideas should, in theory, rise to the top. And that is the danger of the fact that the left is shutting down freedom of speech in the UK. In fact, I would go so far as to say that freedom of speech is now dead in the UK. It's gone. It's not that we're losing it, it's that it has been lost. But the danger with that is that our view and an analysis of the world becomes dogmatic. And the moment it becomes dogmatic, you cut yourself off from analysing problems for what they are. In the same way that the communist states were so dogmatic about what opinions they were allowed to be aired, that they refused to accept certain problems when they were confronted with them. So, for instance, after Chernobyl exploded, it took years before the other nuclear reactors that all had the same problem were ever changed, and they did that because they were forced to by some of the scientists, but they didn't want to, and they resisted it for decades, which could have laid open the possibility of another Chernobyl. But they did that because ideologically, they couldn't accept that the communist state had acted in a way that was against the best interests of its own people. And to suggest such was against the dogma of the communist state.
Yes. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true because, there's even today, there's still so many people which are just outright denying that we haven't lost our freedom of speech. 12,000 people per year are being arrested in the UK for hate speech
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
I think there was a graph which showed all the different countries and who were like the worst offenders. The UK was number one. That's how bad it's gotten.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, we've got to the point that the elites, they know that people are losing faith in their ideology, and they know that people are losing faith in them. I'm all ready for the toppling of the regime. Me, it's like I am done with the elites in this country. And I do see them as a regime. I see them as an oppressive group of about 10,000 people, maybe 20,000 at a push, who are just using the whole of the state apparatus to bless themselves and their friends, to the curse and the detriment of absolutely everybody else in the country. But because they control all the levers of power, authority, and influence, they're able to manipulate, cajole, bully anyone who stands against them, and lull everybody else into a sleep. But because they realize that more and more people are waking up and turning against them, they're clamping down. They're trying to suppress conversation. And they also know, coming back to the Civil War theme, they also know that they've loaded up society for a civil war, and the wood is drying out, and they're trying to stamp on anything that might be a spark, which is understandable, to be fair. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad idea. But the point is, what they should be doing, rather than trying to deal with sparks, is they should be trying to unload. They should stop fire loading society, and they should take away the combustible elements. But they can't do that because their liberal ideology doesn't. So instead, what they try to do is arrest everyone who's saying, "Hey, we're storing up for ourselves trouble here."
Yeah. No, I going back to what you were saying with communism, because there's a lot of elites who are pushing this narrative, and now it's becoming more and more common for people on the left to just outright say, I see myself as a communist. And there's a Jordan Peterson quote which comes to mind, where in order to think, you have to risk offending someone else, which is completely true. This is when they're trying to shut down the hate speech, when they're trying to shut down just freedom of speech online, you are restricting people's ability to think in general. And it has devastating knock-on effects. One of the things that, like you say, the left is particularly blind at connecting up the dots. But when it comes to what Islam pushes into society, what are some of the things which you think the left really missed the most? Whether that be, we have really strong positions on feminism with the left. We have obviously the gay, trans community, whatever. What are the biggest areas they don't see?
Yeah, I mean, you've started a good list yourself, to be honest. Like the alt left, we've recently had an example of it in the UK. So a mosque organised a family day fun run, right, in which all women were banned from participating. So just think about that for a second. If a church had organised a run and said women can't participate, the left would be in uproar. The left would be going, these misogynist Christians and their patriarchy, they're so evil, right? But yet when a Muslim mosque organises a fun run and bans all women from participating, right, the alt left have nothing to say. The wokerati have nothing to say. When we've seen it recently. There was a church, a mosque that was attacked somewhere. I think it was in Wales, and I think it turned out that it was attacked by another Muslim from a different sect. Now, I might be wrong on that. I'm not exactly sure on the precise details, but I do know that a mosque was recently attacked, set fire to, and it was national news. And we had the secretaries of state talking about it. But in the last 3 years, there has been 9,000 attacks against churches in the UK. Has anyone spoke about this? Has anyone mentioned it? Has anyone said we need to give more money to the Christian community to help guarantee their security? No. You know, we've had the libtards going on and on and on about the genocide in Palestine, which, of course, there hasn't been a genocide in Palestine. But they've been completely silent about the deaths of over 100,000 Christians in Nigeria. Now, is it that the Nigerian Christians are too black? Are they too poor? Or are they just too Christian for anyone to give a damn? What about the Christians in Sudan? 1 million of which have been ethnically cleansed and religiously cleansed in North Sudan as part of the civil war, because the two fighting factions are both Islamist groups. Has anyone mentioned them? No. Are they too black? Are they too poor? Or are they too Christian? So the left has an ideological blindness about the fact that if Islam comes to dominate, you can kiss goodbye your equal male-female rights. You can kiss goodbye your LGBTQ agenda. You can kiss goodbye your idea of bodily autonomy. Islam permits men to beat their wives. Is that what feminists stand for? Islam permits that women's lives are valued as half that of a man's. Is that what feminism stands for? Islam says there are schools of thought within Islam that says that a woman can't even leave the house unless she's chaperoned by a male relative. Is that what the left stands for? Islam will greatly restrict abortion. Is that what the left is in favor of? Islam teaches that we can trade human beings as slaves. Is that what the left stands for? Like, the left is ideologically stupid because they think when I talk about Islam, what they see is a brown man or a brown woman. And then they go, well, he's talked about Islam, so he's a racist. Right? There's plenty of white Muslims out there that will prove that I'm not being racist, because I'm clearly not criticizing an ethnicity. I'm criticizing an ideology. There's a cognitive dissonance on the left. And that cognitive dissonance is that the left cultically, as an act of religion, is so committed against, so paranoid and so obsessed with racism that it is willing to turn a blind eye to other injustices just so it can suppress anything or any avenue that might lead to racism. And I want to be clear that there will be people that will jump on my criticism of Islam to try and further some ideology, some racial ideology, because they will use that criticism to try and stir up racism. And I want to say to such people, I am not your ally. You are an enemy of the church, because racists attack Christians. They attack black Christians. They attack Asian Christians. They attack the idea of the Catholicity of the church and say that we should have ethno-states. And I want to say that I am every bit your enemy as I am the enemy of the Islamists. Like, my criticism of Islam is not about race. I believe that I want to see, and I hope to see, Muslims become Christians because I love them. Not because I hate them because of their ethnicity. I'm not against a multi-ethnic state. You know, if there is cognitive dissonance on the left, there's also the similar inability to see things on the right. There's an inability to join up the dots on the right, because the right at this moment in time is trying to double down on classical liberalism as the solution to the problem. Classical liberalism is the cause of the problem. You know, there's this reaction, this hardline reaction in American politics, for instance, which is almost treating the American Constitution like it is a revelation from God, and that the American nation has some special deal with God, right? And it's all about asserting the American way. But that kind of American secular republicanism has not prevented the Islamization of Dearborn, Michigan. It isn't stopping the Islamization of parts of Texas. And so there is a blindness on the right because of their cultic faith in the nation state and in patriotism to the nation state, which is couched within and framed within liberalism, just as there is blindness on the left that thinks that a brown person can't be committed to bad ideas. And incidentally, white people can be committed to bad ideas as well. That's why it's a criticism of Islam, because there are white Muslims committed to bad ideas of Islam as well. Does that make sense? So there is a blindness of the left, but there's also a blindness on the right. And the answer to both is more Christianity.
Yeah, really interesting. You did say something there that, you said a few things there I wanted to touch on. But one of the things which I find the most confusing is this term Judeo-Christian.
Yep.
And in regards to, obviously, besides what happened in the Old Testament, is there actually much connection between modern day Judaism and Christianity today?
Yeah, so the term Judeo-Christian is an academic term. And it just basically highlights the absolute, incontrovertible and utter truth of the fact that Christianity started as a Jewish movement. Like, all of the Old Testament was written by Jews for Jews. All of the New Testament was written by Jews, and a good part of its audience were Jewish believers, right? And academics just highlight that by saying Judeo-Christian, and that term has become popularized, and it's kind of become fashionable to try and knock this term. But I want to warn against this, because this comes, and it kind of feeds back into your last question, is that there are elements on the alt-right, the racist right, who are trying to penetrate the church. And one of their lead-ins, one of the ways that they sort of gain influence, is to try and stir up anti-Semitism. And one of the ways that they are trying to do that is to disconnect Christianity from its Jewish roots. And some Christians who are in every other respect completely orthodox and in every other respect not anti-Semitic are starting to echo this, because they don't understand the political agenda of it. And so Christianity cannot be separated from its Jewish origins. We worship the Jewish Messiah. We worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The prophecies of the Old Testament talk about Gentiles going to Jerusalem. And that is exactly what Christian pilgrims do. We go to Jerusalem. You know, we call God by a Hebrew name. You know, and so Christianity can't be separated from that. Now, that isn't to say that rabbinic Judaism is the same thing that the Judaism was of the Jewish believers in Jesus. Rabbinic Judaism has its origins in Pharisaism, and you'll know from the Gospels the Pharisees were one of the chief opponents of our Lord in his earthly ministry. But that if you read carefully the book of Acts, at the First Council of Jerusalem, there was a Pharisaic party. At the First Council of Jerusalem, there were Pharisees there. There were Pharisees amongst the believers. And so if there are Pharisees amongst the first believers in the book of Acts, it is possible for there to be a rapprochement between rabbinic Judaism and belief in the Messiah. And that actually is what you see in a lot of Messianic Jews, is a rapprochement between rabbinic Judaism and belief and following the Messiah. And so these two are most certainly in tension and friction, but that tension and friction isn't irreconcilable.
So I understand what you're saying in terms of the alt-right using some of these phrases to promote anti-Semitism. But you could also say on the other side of it, how so many politicians will use this term, bless Israel and I'll be blessed, as a way to allow
Not
them
in Britain,
to...
it don't. Is that an American thing? I've never once heard a British politician ever say that ever.
No, this is true. I'm now talking about the West. Sorry, the US. But they use this to justify giving money, giving, weapons, whatever it is, to Israel. And I can understand why the alt-right are against this, because one, my understanding is Judaism completely, obviously rejects, modern Judaism rejects Jesus Christ. And not only do they reject him, there is a resentment towards him. So this whole joint of Judeo-Christian, I can't see how there is a link. Maybe some of the values and stuff like that, I'll agree there. But in terms of if you are a Christian, this idea of blessing Israel, despite the fact that they themselves condemn the person that you see as your Lord, I don't see how you can reconcile that.
So, I mean, my first thought is, are you a practicing Christian?
Do you know what, Bob? Since we last spoke, I have started going to church.
Yay!
Reading the Bible.
Thanks be to God.
And mostly down to this show. In order to understand what's really happening today, I found I have to keep going back in history. I have to understand these religions. So,
did our conversation spark that?
It was a big nudge towards that way. Actually,
I am so glad.
Yeah, dude, you're spot on, honestly. And a really big catalyst was also the death of Charlie Kirk recently.
Yeah. I think the death of the holy martyr Charlie Kirk is going to influence, has impacted a lot of people. It's had a radicalizing effect in the way that the martyrdoms of all the saints should have a radicalizing effect. If the church would only celebrate the deaths of its martyrs more. But let me address the thrust of your question. So, firstly, I would just like to point out your description of modern Judaism as a singular thing. As a religious studies student, I can tell you that modern Judaism is a fractured group. It's one ethnic group, but there are different socio-political and religious and spiritual movements within that one ethnic group. So there isn't a singular modern Judaism. And Messianic Judaism is a modern Judaism. Messianic Judaism starts with Rabbinic Judaism as its starting point. Rabbinic Judaism is itself a development of first century Second Temple Judaism. And so Messianic Judaism is an ultra modern form of Judaism, but it's one that I wholeheartedly support. And no one could accuse the Messianic Jews of being anti-Christian, because they're not. They're not anti-Christ. They're pro-Christ. And I would just point out that most Jews don't have any particular strong opinions about Jesus. Most Jews are actually quite ignorant about Jesus. or they know that Jesus is something that, you know, that some of the goyim, some of the Gentiles worship, but they don't really know much about that, and they haven't got particularly strong opinions about it. There's a few, there are a few that are, you know, the synagogue of Satan, where they are rabbis that are rabidly anti-Christian. They are vehemently against the church, but they're a minority, a loud minority, a bit like American televangelists are a minority, but they've got disproportionate presence on social media. As for you know, support for like this American this Christian Zionism that you see,
Yes.
that perforates across American churches. I believe that is an erroneous teaching, in the same way that I believe that prosperity teaching is erroneous teaching. It's not so erroneous that someone who believes in it isn't a Christian, because someone can believe in prosperity gospel and still be a Christian, and someone can believe in Christian Zionism and still be a Christian. But I do believe it is erroneous teaching. To the geopolitics of Israel and the West, we've got to recognize that essentially Israel is a Western colony. It's a Western military outpost in the Middle East. But that means that it is also the country in the Middle East that is most allied to our own values and to our own way of life. It is the most Western of all the Middle Eastern countries. That doesn't mean that we should give it carte blanche to do whatever it wants. I think that Israel should come under pressure. And I'll give you some reasons why it should come under pressure. Like, Israel denies the right of Messianic Jews to return to Israel. Right now, there is a campaign to de-Christianize the Armenian quarter inside Jerusalem. That needs to be stopped. Israel participated in and helped to support the genocide of Azerbaijan against the Armenian Christians of Artsakh. And for that, Israel needs to really do some reparations and cease trading with Azerbaijan. There are settler extremists that are attacking Palestinian Christians and Palestinian Christian villages, and that need to be reined in and dealt with. However, as much as all of these things do need to be called out, as much as all these things do need to be challenged, the driving force of the ideology of Israel is the survival of Israel and the survival of the Jewish people, which means that you can change the dials on the calculus for Israel and for the Zionist movement. You can make it such that in their calculus, they go, we have to be allies to Christians. We have to treat Christians nicely. We have to be the friend of Christians because that furthers the survival of the Jewish state. Which means that you can negotiate with Israel. It means that Israel's behavior can change because its oppression of Christians in those areas that I've just mentioned is not central to the ideology. And so whilst Israel should be challenged on these injustices, Israel is also an ally against a far more existential threat. Because when Israel fights the evils of Hamas, or when Israel fights the evils of Hezbollah, or when Israel fights the evils of the Yemeni Islamists in Yemen, or the tyrants of Iran, it's fighting an ideology that at its core, as a non-negotiable fact, believes that Christians and Jews should be made second-class citizens. And so we've got to triage in this matrix of competing ambitions and in this matrix of competing threats. We've got to triage the local negotiable threat to the Christian community versus the global existential threat to all Christians. And in that calculus, Israel comes out as an ally that needs to be heavily challenged when it's going awry and can be challenged. And so I think that American Christians, when they drop this erroneous teaching of Christian Zionism, should see Israel as an ally, but not be frightened to put serious pressure on Israel when Israel is doing wrong. So, for instance, America should have said, you stop trading with Azerbaijan or we stop trading with you. And Israel would have stopped trading with Azerbaijan. You know? And our support for Israel should be dependent upon how Israel supports the Christians of the Middle East. The more it supports the Christians of the Middle East, the more we should support Israel. The worse that it treats the Christians of the Middle East, the less we support Israel. That's the calculus that we should offer. And that can only happen when we drop this error of Christian Zionism.
Yes, so dropping the error of Christian Zionism. So I think we could probably both agree that, well, anyway, I would definitely say that the Zionism in general has been massively hurtful to the people in that region. When I think about how much power, and Bibi's not religious too, right? He is not a religious Jew, but
I don't know.
ethnicity-wise, he is. He isn't.
I think a lot of Israelites aren't particularly religious.
Yeah, but they still believe in Zionism. They still believe in a homeland for the Jews, right?
Yeah, of course.
And the problem is they themselves consider themselves a superpower of the world. And
no, they don't. Where did you get that from?
Yeah.
Israel does not consider itself a superpower of the world. Has never said it considers itself a superpower of the world. It is a regional power, and it's demonstrated its regional power because it's literally just kicked the ass of every country around it who's tried to threaten it. Okay,
so in terms of who's the strongest country in the world, the US, right?
Obviously.
And leader of the free world. I mean, we had recently, Trump literally gave a direct order to Bibi Netanyahu. Of course, he doesn't have to listen to him, but when it's the leader of the free world, maybe this is someone you should pay attention to.
Yeah.
He gave a direct order saying, do not bomb Gaza anymore. In no time whatsoever, he continues bombing. So this is someone who really doesn't hold any kind of accountability towards the leader of the free world. We've also had, even at the start of this new term that Trump started, he said to Bibi, stop with the settlements, stop increasing your land, which has been a huge area of contention for the longest time. Sure enough, that continued as it would. And I mean, and even recently, they've just discussed that they're going to now start rebuilding Gaza. Presumably, this is going to be for the benefit of Israel, but, that's just speculation. When I something you said earlier too, you said that it isn't a genocide. So what is it that makes you say that it's not a genocide?
Because if Israel wanted to commit a genocide in Palestine, it could very easily. The point is, Israel is trying to dismantle an Islamist terrorist infrastructure and network that goes from north to south of Gaza and from east to west, that hides behind its civilian population and has radicalized nearly 70% of that population. There is no way that Israel can do that without impacting the entirety of the population of Gaza. The aim of Israel, and don't get me wrong, I am confident that there are some in the alt-right of the Israeli society that would love to drive out all the Gazans from Gaza, right? So there are some, I'm confident that there are some Israeli sections of society that do have genocidal intent. But the reality is that there has been no mass starvation. of Israeli citizens. There have been no mass murder, no mass bombing, no death camps. There's been none of that in Gaza. Israel is fighting a war against a terrorist network that covers every area, the full area of Gaza, and therefore the war cannot be prosecuted without impacting the entirety of the population. But the point is, Israel is going after Hamas. It's not going after Palestinians, right? But you're buying, Louis, as someone who's developing and growing in their Christian faith, you're biting into a false dichotomy that we Christians must choose between Palestinians and Israelis. Our solidarity should be with the church. It should be with the church inside of Israel, and it should be in the church, with the church around Israel. And that obviously includes Palestinian Christians as well. And that, when you start thinking about your calculus that way, about, what's best for the church rather than anybody else, or primarily what's best for the church first, then you start thinking about this whole situation very, very differently. So, Christians inside Israel have more rights, more freedoms, and are better treated than Christians in any other part of the Middle East, apart from maybe the Christian strongholds of Lebanon, right? Why, Louis, are you not talking about the persecution of Christians in Syria? Why is that not featuring large in your mind? It's because of this anti-Semitic obsession with Israel that ignores the persecution of Christians in Syria to talk about Israel's conflict with Gaza. And you're getting carried away with that narrative. Here's what I want to see, right? Here's what I want to advocate for. The Israeli state should work with all Israeli Christians for the evangelization of Gaza. The military state, the police, and the full weight of the Israeli state should be used to protect Arab, Israeli, Christian evangelism of Gaza. And Arab Christians should be encouraged to settle in Gaza, which is under an Israeli protectorate. And Christians from around the Middle East who are fleeing persecution should be encouraged to settle in Gaza. And the Christians should control Gaza in terms of its politics, its policing, its entire infrastructure. And then over the decades, if this continues, over decades, eventually, especially if we take out the self-appointed thugs within that community, if we take those people out, eventually the Gazans will become Christians. Gaza will become a Christian colony. Christians will have a safe place to retreat to inside of the Middle East, and they'll build a Singapore in the Mediterranean. The conflict will end because Christians won't be busy attacking Israel. And I want to state for the record, Gaza belongs to the Palestinian people. Israel surrendered that land. It gave it to them. They unilaterally pulled out and said, that's for you. And because of Islamist ideology, the Gazans ruined the opportunity that was given to them, but it is still a Palestinian land. But the only way to make it work is to make it a Christian Palestine. And that is what we should be pursuing.
Yes. So Bob, I mean, first off, let me say you're completely right with what you're saying about Syria. Why is it that the world is focusing on Palestine when there's so many different, areas where Christians are getting persecuted? I completely agree. There's a reason why I'm getting drawn so much to Christianity and not any other faith. So when you're saying the solution of it should be Christian run, I completely agree. I, there's literally no area where I can argue with you. But the reason why I love Christianity is this idea that we're all equal. You know,
Amen.
you've spoken before about how there's the jizya in Islam, dhimmi status. They see themselves as superior. The thing is, this is obviously something that gets brought up a lot too, but this whole premise of the chosen people, there is a supremacy even there. Even within Judaism, they allow for slavery as well. Again, there's a reason why I'm drawn to Christianity and not anything else.
Yeah.
But, the reason why all eyes are on Israel is I think I'm not just thinking about, what they've been doing over the past 3 years. There's this huge network of Zionists, very powerful Zionists that I think we all have to bring into the picture as well. We have, like the birth of Israel to begin with. This was actually given from the British state to the Rothschilds. It was them who got the land to begin with. We then have to think about, just some of the most powerful companies in the world. We have people like, Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock. When it comes to information, often who can control the narrative wins the war. And then when you look at all of the big companies in the world, nowadays it's much harder to control the narrative because there's so much more independent journalists, right? Anyone with a camera can essentially become that. You can have a YouTube account, you can have your Instagram, you can have your Facebook, whatever. One of the things that we saw really quite recently was there was one platform which they didn't have control over, and this was TikTok. They being the West, right? Where you couldn't influence what the algorithm does. And subsequently, probably the biggest support from Palestine probably came from TikTok. It was the TikTok algorithm which was really pushing this out. And because there's no control over it, they weren't able to silence it. This is where there's been this growing anti-Semitic hatred. And let me be clear, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with hatred in any form. I do agree with truth, though. And so what we've seen, the last couple of weeks maybe, we saw Trump buy TikTok, and who was the person overseeing that all? Larry Ellison. Again, a Zionist Jewish man. What was his first move to do? Well, it was put an ex-IDF soldier in charge of the new hate speech. So naturally, what's going to happen? Where's the bias going to be, So I think there's a lot of things we have to consider when we think about Israel and when we think about Zionist influence. Because we could even see this on Twitter too. Elon Musk, he makes it a free speech platform. There's zero censorship, no censorship. Suddenly all these investors pull out. 90% of the investors go straight away. Why was that? Okay, well, they say you need to have some censorship. And I don't know if you saw it, but the only censorship which was now allowed was anything which is anti-Semitic. If it's anti-Semitic, that would be censored. Everything else, fill your boots. It's a free-for-all. So I think there is a lot of anti-Semitic narratives going out there, but at the same time, we do have to at least acknowledge that Zionists and a lot of the Jewish elites have a huge monopoly on information and the algorithms and everything else.
Okay, Louis, brother, I want to caution you. You are leaning heavily into an anti-Semitic trope, an anti-Semitic characterization. You're being influenced by anti-Semitism, like everything. And I'm going to try and explain why. But I'm appealing to you, and I'm counseling you to not go any further down that rabbit hole, because that is what you're doing. And like Alice, you'll get lost in anti-Semitism land. I think that's tortured, that analogy, but you get what I'm trying to say. Let me just explain.
Can I ask?
No. Let me just explain something, because I think it's really important, right? Just because someone is a Jew does not mean that they are a Zionist, right?
Sure. Yeah,
and there are obviously influential Jews in Western society, but there are also influential Christians. There are also influential Muslims. There are influential Hindus, right? So why do people get jittery when there are influential Jews? Now, I do not doubt for 1 second that a percentage of those influential Jews are Zionists, and that they use their influence for the purposes of furthering Zionism. Just like I do not doubt for a second that there are influential Muslims who are Islamists who use their influence to further the progress of Islamization. Just like I do not deny that there are Christians who are influential who use their influence for the furthering of the kingdom of God. Okay? So there is this reality in which there are influential figures that have an ideology. That's not surprising at all. Sure. But this anti-Semitic trope that you're leaning into suggests that there is a disproportionate influence of Zionists. And what it often leans into is it often conflagrates influential Jews who push progressive liberalism onto the West. The idea of open borders, the idea of free sex, the idea of, this, that, and the other, that's actually got nothing to do with the Mosaic Covenant and everything to do with Western Enlightenment thinking. In other words, these are integrated Jews who are expressing white European ideas. Marxism is an Enlightenment idea. It may have been pushed by someone who was Jewish, but he was an integrated Jew. He had adopted the assumptions of the Enlightenment and rejected everything Jewish about his belief system, right? And so it is this sense of disproportionality. Now, the reality is that there are lots of influential Jews who are pushing progressive liberalism. That is not Zionism. That's not Zionism at all. I give you an example. The leader of the Green Party at the moment in the UK is a Jewish guy. But he's not pushing Zionism. He's pushing liberal progressive ideology to the hilt. That is not someone who is working against the West. He's fully integrated into the West. It is the Enlightenment ideas that are destroying Western society, because the Enlightenment is a rejection of Christianity. Now, are there networks of Zionists? Of course there are. Are there networks of Islamists? Yes. Are there networks of Christians? God, let there be networks of Christians working together for the kingdom of God. Stop complaining that some other group is out chessing you on the chessboard and start playing chess yourself. And stop focusing, and let's also triage, right? So we've made a distinction between Jews that are Zionists and Jews that are not Zionists, right? Because not every Jew is a Zionist and not every influential Jew.
I agree.
But the trope that you're leaning into disproportionately over magnifies the influence of the Zionist networks, right? And that's the danger of it. That is the danger of it. But also, that the other problem with that is it doesn't triage accurately. The biggest threat to the West is liberal progressive networks, right? And anyone from any ethnicity can be a liberal progressive, Jews included, but also a whole lot of Gentiles, right? The biggest threat to the West is coming from white Europeans, not from Jews. The biggest threat to the West after white Europeans who have bought into liberal progressive ideology is coming from Islamists. Because the obsession with the Zionists is about Israel. They're not interested in destroying the West. Their calculus is all about what helps the Jews settle in Israel. And most Zionists understand that Western backing is essential to that project. So they don't want to destroy the West. Now, And it is an alt-right conspiracy bullshit nonsense that tries to suggest that Zionist networks are trying to destroy the West, when the West is the biggest backer of the Israeli state. Now, whereas Islamist networks, just like not every Muslim is an Islamist, yeah, not every Muslim is involved in an Islamist network, but the Islamist networks that do exist do want to destroy the West. So let's triage intelligently about what the threat is. And more to that, I would just say, stop whining. Nothing prevents Christians from organizing their own networks. And if you are too lazy, too idle, too cowardly, or too limp-wristed to do so, you're part of the problem. Christians should organize their own networks to advance our agenda as Christians. And since no one accuses, well, actually, the alt-left, the progressives, they do. I just watched something on YouTube last night talking about the evils of the new apostolic reformation, the cult. And obviously we get anti-Christian tropes thrown at us, like the idea that Christians burnt children in Canada, and you've got all these dead bodies in Canada that's led to the attack against over 100 churches in Canada, or the fact that Christian nationalists are trying to take over the world, and really they're just neo-Nazis in disguise. Just as there are anti-Christian tropes, there are anti-Jewish tropes, and you're buying into an anti-Jewish trope right now.
I mean, if that's how you see it, yes, in terms of coming across as whining about it, for me, it's more of what is going on in society, and why are certain countries supporting others? Why is it that the UN has declared it a genocide, but then there's a big pushback against that as well? The
UN is part of the problem, bro. Like the UN and international law, you've got a concern for what's happening in the United Kingdom. Part of the reason why the United Kingdom cannot solve its problems is because it is bound up in international treaty after international treaty after international treaty. And that is preventing the United Kingdom from doing anything to solve its problems, because it would break those international treaties. The UN is part of the problem. It is an antiquated, outdated institution that's losing its relevance, that's thankfully losing its funding, and is actually restraining, it is preventing national governments from pursuing the things that they need to do. So don't appeal to that authority when it suits you to attack Israel, when that same authority is what is helping to destroy the United Kingdom.
Yeah. I mean,
don't get me wrong. I've stated, I acknowledge that there are Zionist networks.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that there is a Zionist agenda. I acknowledge that there are problems with Israel and that Israel is doing things wrong. But the thing that I'm trying to warn you against, Louis, is that these are all the gates by which someone is led down the path of anti-Semitism.
Hey, I hear your concerns, and just by the same token, I don't assume every Jew is a Zionist. Neither are they going to be. You have secular Jews, you have religious Jews. Yeah. Like you say, there's many different sects within Judaism. But I have got a question for you then. What's more of a concern for you? Would it be the BRIC card, and have you heard all of the potential dangers which could come with that, or would it be Islam?
Islam is absolutely the bigger threat. Absolutely the bigger threat. The BRIC card is a blip in history. I mean, Britain itself, the United Kingdom, might be a blip in history. It's only like 300 years old. The church is 2,000 years old. Islam is 1,400 years old. Islam has persecuted, the Islamic world has persecuted the Christian church for 1,400 years without a break. And for 1,400 years without a single interruption for a single year of that entire 1,400 years, there has always been some Islamist army marching and attacking some Christian population. So I won't have any rubbish. Oh, you're just driven by Islamophobia. Like, no, I'm driven by a love and a concern for the people of God, the church, who have suffered 1,400 years of continuous persecution by an ideology that, when it animates people, leads to that persecution. Just like Nazism leads to persecution of Jews, particularly Jews, you know. So my point is that the BRIC card, yes, it is a horrendous policy. It's a dangerous policy. It's a bad policy, but it will come and go. You know, the British had ID cards before. I don't know if you're aware of this. Like during World War II. Yeah, there were ID cards in World War II, and then we got rid of them. You know, the ID card is a bad idea. God willing, it will not get off the ground. It will be stopped. But even if it was implemented, it's not like it's the Antichrist. Though everybody, you know, the hysterical Christians will say it's the Antichrist. It's the Antichrist. There's always some hysterical Christian that says everything is the Antichrist. You know, but the reality is that the ID cards is a bad idea. But the bigger threat existentially to the very basis of Western civilization is Islamification.
I remember our last interview too. You were saying how liberalism and the state essentially bends the knee to the demos, right?
Yes.
Whoever shouts the loudest, that's who they listen to. And you know, going back to the attack on the synagogue, instantly the thing that I found interesting was they were talking about anti-Semitism straight away.
Should they not?
Well, the thing which I find interesting about it is the state is very quick to shout about Islamophobia.
Yes.
In this instance, it's very quick to talk about anti-Semitism.
Yes.
The people that they leave out every single time is Christianity.
Amen. I agree. If someone like what happened in New Zealand when that guy walked into the mosque and shot up the people inside the mosque, the world should talk about Islamophobia at that point. You know, hatred of Muslims is a sin. When the Muslims go into the mosque, into the synagogue in Manchester, when the Muslim went into the synagogue in Manchester and stabbed those Jews for being Jewish, the world should talk about anti-Semitism. So when thousands of churches are attacked in France and hundreds of churches are attacked in Canada, and in the last 3 years there's been 9,000 attacks against churches in the UK, why are we not talking about Christophobia? When Muslim militants are ethnic, religiously wiping out over 100,000 Christians in Nigeria, why are we not talking about Christophobia? When when nearly 2 million Christians are butchered in South Sudan in a campaign of jihad that lasts for 18 years, why did the world not talk about Christophobia? When 120,000 Christians just a few years ago were driven from Artsakh, Azerbaijan, why? Because they were Christian, why was the world not talking about Christophobia? When Christians in Syria are having their villages attacked, why are we not talking about Christophobia? Why are we not talking about the Christophobia that has led to the genuine ethnic and religious cleansing of all Greek Cypriots from northern Cyprus? Why aren't we talking about their right to return? And I want to say that the first part of why that doesn't happen is because Christians don't talk about it. Because Christians don't stand up for themselves. Because Christians don't stand up for one another. And part of the reason why they don't stand up for one another is because you end up getting pulled along by other people's agendas. What about Israel? What about Palestine? What about Zionists? What about this? What about that? You're allowing your ideology to be influenced by non-Christian matrices, by non-Christian paradigms. Because the deeper you go into the apostolic teaching, the more you identify with the ecclesium, the more you identify with the body of Christ. And the more you identify with the body of Christ, the more the concern of the persecuted church rises in your value of concerns. And so you start thinking, actually, well, what about the Christians that are being persecuted in Pakistan? What about the Christians that are being persecuted in India? What about the Christians that are being persecuted in Burma? Have any of these featured in one of your live streams, Lewis?
You got me. No, I can't say it has.
And that's my point, is you are allowing alt-right racists to distort your worldview by their entry argument about Zionism, when actually, as a Christian and as someone who's growing in their faith, you should be focusing on what's happening to Christians. Like what's happening to Christians in Malaysia, what's happening to Christians in Indonesia, what's happening to Christians in China, what's happening to Christians in North Korea.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, Bob. You're not wrong.
Amen.
But one of the things, I think when we last spoke, there was a lot of pressure of, like, Speaker's Corner, for example. I remember there was still a lot of pressure on you. I see you in the videos and there's 10 people, all Muslim, shouting at you, interrupting you. You still stand your ground. Always amazing to see you do this, by the way. But has that now changed? Because, I see the state of the UK. We recently got the new Home Secretary who's a Muslim. But at the same time, we have seen a surge, or as far as I can tell, we've seen a surge in Christianity as well. We've seen a surge of people returning back to the church. Is Speaker's Corner changing for the better now, would you say?
There's clear evidence of a quiet revival going on. I mean, it's been termed the quiet revival. And I think the reason why it's been termed the quiet revival is because the media don't want to spotlight it.
Sure.
But there is definitely there is a return of interest to the Christian faith, and it is coming from those on the political right. And unfortunately, but sadly, predictably, the leadership of the mainstream churches is completely caught blindsided, completely ignorant, unaware, unprepared, unimaginative, uncreative in their response, and is sadly, I fear, going to drop the ball. Because I remember going to a church recently, and bearing in mind that it's Islamists and alt-left that are attacking churches up and down the West. I went to a church once and they prayed against the rise of the right. And it was just like, are you kidding me? That's the one group that's open to Christianity. And so there is this new interest in Christianity. And I think it's come about through a number of different things. The first thing is that during the lockdown, people's entertainments were stripped away, their distractions were stripped away. And then naturally, they started to ask themselves more serious questions. Then two, the LGBTQ silent P overreach when they started going after children, because we know in the LGBTQ plus agenda there's a silent P in that agenda, and the targeting and sexualization of children horrified people, and people started to see evil, and then if there's evil, there must be something good. And then also the fact that people watched mass protests in favor of a genocidal bloodlust from Hamas against Israel from October the 7th, and celebrated that and supported that and support a terrorist organization like Hamas, made people realize, well, if they support terrorism abroad, they might support terrorism here in the UK. And these three things have triangulated to stir up a lot of people's souls, that they're now looking, well, what's my identity? What's my culture? What is it to be Western? And obviously, the moment you start asking those kind of dangerous questions, there's only really one answer: Christianity. And so there is this movement now, particularly amongst young men, into the churches, particularly Pentecostal and Catholic style churches, where they're giving Christianity a chance. And I really plead, I beg, I implore any Christian to share this particular clip with their church leaders, that if all the church does is offer people the same curated church program that for generations people have rejected, then this quiet revival will just be a blip and it'll disappear. It'll be like the Welsh revival. What we need is to cultivate this openness, to cultivate this willingness to explore, to cultivate this energy that is being offered to us by all these new catechumens, and to cultivate it into socio-economic and political force with an agenda to establish a new Christendom. And that requires us to move outside of our normal church programs. I'm not saying that we need to abandon what is normal church program, but there needs to be more than what is the normal church program, so that they are discovering that actually we Christians do stand up for something. And to any of the new converts that are watching this, I want to say, even if the leadership don't get it, don't give up. You're going to be the next generation of leaders. And do push the church into that direction that it needs to move in, because church leaders are by nature, sadly, small c conservatives, and a lot of them are just incompetent. So don't let them effeminize you. Don't let them take away your masculinity. Don't let them narrow your ambition.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And, I'd even go what I've seen firsthand. And I could even speak to this from personal experience as well. But I know people who are very driven. I know people who, would go out, party all the time. This is their entertainment. And obviously liberalism took people away from the church. And it made you more focused on the individual. I know people now who, they've just gone in this spiral, and it's progressively gotten more and more insane. And actually, these people, like I say, they're driven, they're successful. They had no purpose in life. It was actually only until they actually looked into church. The same people are completely different. They've been completely revived. They got a different energy. They got a different attitude towards life, just from this one small change. And my own experience, the more you focus, the less I focus on myself and focus on others, focus on helping others, generally the happier I am. So I'm not surprised at all why the church is getting the revival it has. With the UK, just to go back a little bit. So I know before when we spoke about this, you were saying how you weren't scared of being a martyr. You were saying how it is a sin to be a coward in Christianity. Now that we've got the extra pressure, before I feel like Islam was looking like a huge threat, and it's still there. Don't get me wrong, but now we're having extra pressure put by the state as well. I've seen people who are preaching similar to yourself get arrested, and it's becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
Are you afraid about what's going to happen in the future with yourself?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I'll start with the last point and work my way backwards through some of the points that you've made. A lot of Christians are being arrested for evangelizing. And I want to raise the question of how much of it is because they're evangelizing versus how much of it is how they are evangelizing. You see, Christians have fetishized this idea of preaching at people, standing there with a megaphone and preaching at everybody. And it's a fetishization of the 1700s in a way that is unhelpful. I have evangelized on the streets for years, and I have never been arrested. But the reason for that is that I'm not shouting at people. What I'm doing is I set up a book table, I wait for people to come and talk to me, and then I have conversations that are based on mutual respect, where they articulate their opinion, I give my opinion, they give their arguments, I give my arguments, and I try to win them over through a combination of good argument and charm, you know. And if it gets too heated, I often just sort of bring the conversation to a close. I've never been arrested doing that. And so part of me wonders is it how they are doing evangelism rather than the way that they do evangelism? And so often, because often what I see is people are trying to draw these comparisons out on X. And don't get me wrong, I do believe there's two-tier policing. I do believe that there's a bias in policing. And that bias is against Christians in the context of witnessing. But often these comparisons are comparing apples to pears rather than apples to apples. Like if you could show me evidence that Christians were getting arrested for just handing out books and talking to people, and you know, then I'd be, or if you could show me Muslims preaching at people like lots of Christians do and then getting arrested and then not getting arrested, but Christians are, then I would agree that there's much more of a problem. But I actually think it's more to do with how rather than the actual evangelism itself. Now, so that's the first thing. I want to encourage Christians to abandon preaching at people and to start setting up kiosks and books stalls and being more communicative and aiming more at having conversations with people than preaching at people, right? It is like if I was shouting to you about any other topic than Christianity, most Christians would find it annoying. So why do you not think that the rest of the world finds it annoying when you're shouting at them about the gospel? Yeah. So I actually think it's more to do with how we evangelize rather than the evangelism itself. You know, you mentioned yourself about this idea of your life is more fulfilled when you think about other people and work towards other people and less focused on yourself. And I laud it and applaud it. And I would want to encourage you to enlarge in your vision to understand that as Christians, we are a nation of priests who offer up our souls and bodies as a living sacrifice to the Lord our God to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. And that kingdom of heaven should affect all of our relationships, should affect our society, should affect our culture, should affect our economy, and should affect our politics, as well as affect the inner dynamism of our soul. And the more of that you can grasp and the more of that you can embody, the more of that you can live out, the more impactful you're going to be as a Christian. And the biggest danger to that is syncretism. You know, this idea of combining Christianity with liberalism. You know, if we go to India and we see Christians combining the worship of Jesus with the worship of Shiva, you know, we can go, that's syncretism, and we'd call it out and say, this is unacceptable. As Christians, we don't do syncretism. You know, it's the mistake that the Jesuits made when they took on board too much Confucianism in their expression of Christianity in China when in the 16 and 1700s. But Western Christians are blind to how they syncretize the Christian faith with liberalism, an overemphasis on individualism, an over-identification with the nation state, too much of a belief in the idea that Christianity shouldn't impact politics. You know, these are syncretic beliefs where Christianity has been compromised with liberalism. The more you can throw off liberalism, the more space you create in your life for Christianity. You know, and syncretism is a danger that we all face. In Ghana, for example, the syncretism with shamanism and Christianity. The prosperity gospel is a clear example of syncretism with consumerism. You know, Christian Zionism is syncretism of Christianity and Zionism. So there's always dangers of syncretism, and the more that we can throw off syncretistic practices, the better.
Sure. Bob, always a pleasure to talk to you. Very much enjoyed it.
I've very much enjoyed it as well, brother. And I hope you don't find me too harsh, but I am trying to give you genuine counsel, because I desire the good of your soul.
Dude, I welcome it completely. I understand the position where you're coming from, and I do appreciate it. I think we do have a difference of opinion, but I can understand your concerns. I can understand your opinion for sure. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed our show. As you can see, our content can be a tad controversial at times. Because of that, the algorithm really doesn't like us. The good news is that's where you can. If you like us and you want to support us, the easiest ways are to like, comment, and subscribe. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us here at Blunt Clarity. On top of that, we've made a list of some of our favorite videos, which you can find right here. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Enjoy.